You can just flip right on to the next slide. So my background is bridal and evening couture, bespoke suiting. And that was many, many years ago that I started a mass customization shop in Edmonton, Alberta, of all places. And we were quite successful. The challenge came when we needed to scale, because having a business based on one person, myself as a pattern maker, you reach a ceiling very, very quickly. So I had to go into research and to try to figure out what was going on. And this gown that I have on here was kind of the turning point. I'm not sure how many pattern makers we have on the call, but this is a bias gown. It's actually a very, very simple gown to make. All of the torso darting is simply put into side seam and converted into pleats. And the beautiful thing about this gown, this was for a magazine, and this was way back in 2004. So we weren't using anything other than size 8 models at the time. But this gown was fantastic. We did this gown for the premier's daughter when she graduated, and she was a size 18. It was a marvelous style, but CAD could not parameterize this gown. And unfortunately, CAD still can't parameterize this gown. Gerald touched on a little bit of why. With the children throwing the ball. The children know what they're doing and they can't explain it. And he made that same analogy with couturiers. Couturiers know what they're doing with this gown. I told you, I'm taking the darts, I'm putting them to the side seam, and I'm converting them to pleats. And it seems like CAD should be able to do that same task for me, and it can't. So Gerald was talking about taking these techniques and putting them to math. And these are the things that a lot of people, myself included, are doing right now. And I'm going to move on to the next slide, and I'm going to start to talk about some of these technologies as they come to market, how we're going to start to use them. Katie, the slides that you show are absolutely, those were absolutely brilliant. We need to do more of that to show people what we're talking about. The way posture affects fit. I'm going to give you an example. I would do a bride and she would stand beautifully tall in front of the mirror, and there would be no wrinkling in the front. And then gradually, as we chit-chatted, a wrinkle would start to build on the front of her body. So posture is not a singular thing. We don't have a singular posture. We stand straight in front of a mirror, nice and tall. And then as we're talking to people, we kind of slouch. So as these, as the opportunity comes, as CAD evolves, we're going to be tasked with some very interesting choices. That the choices that Katie showed you, she was having to make. Do we fit for that person standing nice and tall, or do we fit for when they slouch a tiny little bit? And won't it be a joyous occasion when we can actually have software to do that? So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, and I'm going to talk about the reason that CAD is having challenges right now, parameterizing for shape, for posture, for all of these different things, and how CAD is in the process of evolving, and the decisions that we're going to have to make using CAD very, very soon. Next slide, please. So I have had people say to me, well, you know, Emma, this gown, we can do hand draping in CAD. And so I just wanted to touch on that. We can, of course, I can hand drape this in CAD, but it's a very time-consuming process. And I can tell you from having run a business, it's, you know, we're not using CAD to its full advantage. And it's just not very effective. This is a very simple mathematical operation, and CAD should be able to do this for us. Next slide. So I explained that the process for creating this gown is to take the torso darts, and we would simply put them into the side seam. And because CAD can't do that, I'm going to sort of explain why that happens. On the next slide, please. So when we're using 3D CAD, it's really easy to think that the humanoid, the avatar, is a mesh. So we're just going to take those onion skins, we're going to remove them, and that's going to be our pattern. And it's very unfortunate that this even works at all. It does work, but it only works in fabric that has stretch. And unfortunately, because it works in stretch fabric, that has sort of led us astray for about 10 years. I myself even tried to make this work for a period of time. And the reason this doesn't work is because of what Katie was talking about. What Katie was intuitively doing when she's showing you the grain lines on the fabric and how she's getting rid of wrinkling and buckling, she's applying the principles of fit. And just very briefly, if anybody is not familiar with the principles of fit, you really must do some reading, because that's going to be the next stage for CAD. But just really quickly, what those are is we choose a horizontal and a vertical line on the body. And generally speaking, that the vertical line is with the center front, center back of the body. Sometimes we'll have that on the side seam. And then we will choose a horizontal line, which can be the waistline, the hip, or maybe a few. And the concept is we will dart and shape to try to maintain those vertical horizontal lines. And that's what Katie was doing when she's adjusting the fabric to keep her lines at the waist. And as you can see with this onion skin here, you could go and put forced horizontal and vertical lines, but it's not going to be perfect. And if you look at the pocket areas here, and this would most likely be a blue jean plant, a chino plant. And as we all know, in the back of our jeans, there's a yoke. Well, you would not create a very effective yoke on the back of a pant with this pattern. And the reason why is because in trying to achieve these principles of fit, the grain lines, what's happening is, just as in the gown that I showed you, I have manipulated the darts into the side seam. In a blue jean and yoke, the darts are manipulated and cut out to form that shape on the yoke. And so by just drawing a line on the body here, you're going to have very peculiar wrinkling and buckling and deformation. It's not going to be correct at all. Next slide, please. So this just repeats what I just said, is when we are taking an onion layer, when we are using this mesh flattening, UV unwrapping to create a pattern, the shaping devices, the shaping and fitting devices that are very specific to body shape, morphology, those aren't being correctly positioned. And that's what controls our wrinkling, buckling, deformation that we see. Next slide, please. So very briefly, what I've put here is just to encourage anybody who's not familiar with the principles of fit to just have do a Google search and find out a little bit more. You could do an entire month-long course on these. But once again, essentially what they are is they're maintaining a vertical and horizontal planes. And that's important to create the shaping devices. Now, yes, you can choose for design effect, to change those, but you always must have that as a base point of reference. For example, the gown that I showed you, is cut on the bias, which means the fabric is at a 45-degree angle. But in order to create that and to have the wrinkling and buckling, the beautiful draping where I want it, I need to have those horizontal and vertical lines as a base point of reference. Next slide. And I've chosen a very simple slide. It would take several months to explain precisely how you assign body shaping devices at a pattern level. But I've chosen one area here, and this is the waist. And this pattern here shows a hip girth and a bust girth that is the same. And the only thing that I'm changing here is the waist. And of course, this explanation reflects that there's a very smooth torso and that I can have these elongated darts. But these darts, depending on the body shape, might be shorter or longer. But by simply changing this dart, same bust, same waist, or same hip, I'm sorry, you can see how the waist can be changed from a 70-centimeter waist to a 98-centimeter waist. And if you sort of visualize that in your head, you can see how the body shape is changing. And that's with just one set of darts, and that's the darts that relate to the waist. Now, there's neck darts and shoulder darts and arm side, it goes on and on and on. And there's wedges as well. So there's all sorts of different shaping devices. So I've just shown you one area, but just by changing one thing, this would be a good example of when we say, well, I have a size 10 pattern, but there's so many different body shapes within that size 10. So this is one example of how that's even possible. Next slide, please. So I wanted to show you how, okay, so first of all, just in case there's not pattern makers on the call, dart manipulation is fundamental. It's critical to pattern making. And this here shows a similar concept to the gown that I showed you at the front, where I'm manipulating the darts and I'm going to make those beautiful pleats and drapes in the side seam. And if you look at the three patterns at the top, just take note, there's very, very subtle difference in the darts between those three patterns. But if you look at the manipulation of those darts underneath, you will see that their manipulation really changes the geometry. And if we move to the next slide, we can see them overlaid. And what's really, really interesting is the manipulation of those darts has actually changed on one of them, the swing of the skirt. So it kind of appears that I've given more hip ease. But because this gown is done in bias, I haven't. Once again, this is for the same hip girth, but the manipulation of the darts is causing a different swing on that skirt altogether. And if you remember back, those torsos were only slightly different, but the end result is quite dramatic. And this diagram here, probably better than any other diagram, explains why the UV unwrapping, the flattening of a mesh, the onion layer, however it is that you want to call it, why that is not working for making garments. Because dart manipulation is absolutely fundamental to pattern design. It is the nuance, all of the nuances that Katie was trying to achieve. These are shaping devices. And when Gerald was talking about the nuances of the couturiers and the tailors, this is partly it. They're not always really conscious of the nipping and the tucking that they're doing, but this is the end result that's being achieved. Next slide, please. So these facts expose the flaws within traditional CAD parameterization engines. It's because of this process of, well, first of all, the recognition of the importance of darts. You cannot make a proper yoke on a blue jean. You cannot make a proper bra cup just by removing an onion layer. So the recognition of darts and then dart manipulation, those are the flaws within parameterization, and those that's what has inhibited CAD parameterization from better helping all of us scale. Next slide, please. So this just summarizes what I've just said. So the importance of shaping devices, and then understanding that different body morphologies have different shaping. Next slide, please. So what I'm showing you here is how, just a very simple drawing of how a dart is manipulated. So in essence, you maintain theta, and you can move it to any position on the pattern perimeter. And as you can see, this pattern drastically changes, and the styles that I would develop from these patterns would be very different as well. And once again, I'm showing you one dart here. There could be a neckline dart, there could be additional waist darts that needed, there could be shoulder darts. The shaping devices, they're so there's so many reasons why they would be here. I've kept this diagram simple, just showing you one, but the more darts you add, it's going to get far more complicated. So this is very, very important. This is the nuance. Next slide, please. So the other big flaw, and I think there's a lot of people on this call because this concept's getting a lot of recognition now and traction, is that when we go to pattern making books, there is this assumption, and there's beautiful YouTube videos too. There's this assumption that we're going to draft first time and it's going to fit. And the reason that is not a reality is because these shaping devices are unique to morphology, and pattern drafting books show us one set of shaping devices for a standard shape. Now I can take this pattern here into CAD parameterization. I can scale this for size. It's very, very, very difficult to scale this for shape. It's possible. It will be possible. It's going to be possible very soon. But there's an order of operation change that needs to happen to make that possible. Next slide, please. And this is saying, apparently I'm getting ahead of myself. Currently, we can scale for size, but CAD parameterization cannot scale for shape. Next slide, please. So in case nobody's familiar with the concept of parent-child model, one of the brilliant things about pattern making is if I was making a new brand, and let's say I'm doing yoga wear, I'm going to decide on a rough fit that I want. I'm going to make a template block. It's going to have my fit model dimensions in there, and then it's going to have the degree of tightness that I want. And that's going to be my template block for my brand. And that is known as a parent pattern. And that parent pattern, I can literally use infinitely by changing just a few simple things. For example, I can take the template block and perhaps I would like a diamond shape on the front or angled lines. I would add those as design lines. And just that in CAD, that should be done as a layer, because you always want to keep your original template block, because like I said, you're going to use it over and over. But by adding new design lines, I've got a new pattern. But also, let's say, for example, I'm making a summer dress as I have on here. Then I move on to my next layer, my facings and hem. If it's a summer dress, maybe I don't want a lining in it, and I'm just going to do a bias edge, and I have a whole new design. But I could come back in and change that layer number 4, and I could do facings and a full lining, and I have an evening gown out of the exact same pattern. So each of these different layers changes the design, even seam allowances. If I'm doing a let's say a beautiful trouser that ends around the end of the calf, and I put a beautiful 7.5 centimeter hem in it, as opposed to a rolled hem, it changes the design. So each of these layers changes the template block. But at any point in time, I can go back to that template block and I can reuse it for another pattern. So that's the parent-child theory that's very critical to pattern engineering. And you can go to the next slide. And we can move on again. I'm not sure why I put that one there. Should have done some better editing. So if you were paying really close attention to the last one, you would have noticed that I didn't have a layer 2 in there. And very specifically, because this is how we are going to adapt current CAD models so that we can parameterize for shape as well as size. So we're going to have a dart manipulation model in there. And that is very important because as you look at this gown over here, I've manipulated the darts out and I've created a whole different style. If I'd left those darts in at the bust and the waist, it would look completely different. So this dart manipulation layer is going to be quite critical. And it's going to be critical for a couple of different reasons. First of all, it would be critical if I was just working from one body shape. But as we all know, the slide I showed you where the waist changes just simply by changing a dart, body shape is varied. So within this layer, with the new CAD that's coming online, we're going to have to start to think. If I have a trouser and it has one dart in the back and I want to make a blue jean, then I need to decide where that one dart is going to be manipulated to. But on this dart manipulation layer, we're also going to have to think, what happens if there's 2? What happens if there's 3? What happens if I don't want darts? How do I create that blue jean yoke then? So the new CAD that's going to come out on this layer here, we're going to have to really think about the dart manipulation, the body shapes that we're working with, and it's going to become an inherent part of our design process. So this goes back to what Gerald was saying about bringing the math into our decisions. This is going to be part of our decision making. Next slide, please. The other thing that's going to have to change is this template block, because, you know, I'm just showing you 4 very simple, very slight variations and just in waist body shape. And remember, there's a lot of factors beyond waist body shape. So how I would treat all 4 of these shape, these size patterns, these size template blocks, it's going to be different. So this is another decision that a decision-making process that's going to become part of new CAD is for each of these body shapes. How many of these body shapes am I going to put into my line? And then on the next layer, how am I going to deal with the darting that is specific to that body shape? Next slide, please. And that is it. And I've probably gone over, and I apologize. And I thank you all for your time and look forward to your questions.